Hi, my name is Jade, and in this documentary I will be discussing the welfare of zoo animals and their behaviour at Camperdown Zoo, paying particular attention to the Lord Gibbon. Every zoo should follow the 5 freedoms. The 5 freedoms are freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury or disease, freedom to express natural behaviours, and freedom from fear and distress. The 5 freedoms outline 5 aspects of animal welfare under human control and act as a baseline for today's legislation. They were established in response to the 1965 UK government, the Bramble Report on livestock and husbandry, and were made official in a 1979 press statement by the UK Farm Animal Welfare Council. All zoos must have a licence to operate. The Zoo Licensing Act 1981 requires an inspection and licensing of all zoos in Great Britain. The Act aims to ensure that where animals are kept in enclosures, they are provided with a suitable environment to provide an opportunity to express most normal behaviour. Initial licences are issued for a period of 4 years. After this 4-year period, replacement licences are issued for a period of 6 years. Zoos have an obligation to implement conservation measures as a condition of any licence. The Bali Directive tells you what you need to do to move certain animals that are not traditional livestock and their germplasm. This includes zoo and lab animals and some pet animals. Some of the organisations that govern zoos include WAZA, which is the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which is a global alliance of regional associations, national federations, zoos and aquariums, dedicated to the care and conservation of animals and their habitats around the world. BIAZA, which is the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquariums, the professional body representing the best zoos and aquariums in Britain and Ireland, dedicating their work to animal welfare, education and conservation work. Being a zookeeper can be a challenging job with many responsibilities. Keepers will keep animal enclosures clean, germ-free and safely secured. They must prepare food and feed the animals. They also must administer any medication needed. Observing the animals and checking for signs of distress or illness is very important. Other roles the keepers have include coming up with enrichment ideas, working with professionals such as vets, educating visitors, keeping daily detailed records of behaviours, eating habits, births, deaths and other events, and assist with breeding procedures. The ARC system was developed as an electronic information management system to provide a way to organise all information about an animal and make it electronically accessible to keepers, curators, veterinarians and nutritionists. Breeding records include information about the breeders, birth dates of the breeders, their genotypes, identifiers such as ear tag numbers or chips, and what generation they are in line. Other forms of record keeping are ZIMS, which is the Zoological Information Management System for Husbandry, which is web-based. EAPS, which is the European Endangered Species Programme, which are produced by EAZA, and ESBs, which is the European Stud Book. In the stud books, a record of births, deaths and transfers are kept and the data is analysed to see if a species is doing well. Lard gibbons like to eat leaves, plants and fruits when available. Eating takes up about 1/3 of their day. They obtain their food by shaking trees so the fruit will fall and breaking branches off to eat the leaves. A gibbon's diet in captivity can consist of fruit, vegetables that are raw or cooked, cereals and grains, leaves and pellets. The preparation and feeding must be planned to be suitable for the needs of each gibbon based on whether or not they are lactating females or small infants. A clean water source is really important and must be available at all times. Fruit, vegetables and pellets are placed or scattered up high on platforms and on enrichment. Some food may be placed in their dens at night. The gibbons are fed less in captivity due to there not being as much space in their enclosure for them to brachiate. Scatter feeding helps to prolong foraging and feeding times. Placing the food high helps encourage the gibbons to move around and take advantage of the space of their enclosure. This can help mimic how a gibbon would forage in the wild as they need to climb and swing through trees to find food. Putting food on enrichment can help them interact with it and keep them busy. Scatter feeding helps to mimic the natural behaviour of foraging, as it takes more time and work to find the food in the wild. Placing vegetables in their den at night can encourage them to go inside and sleep. Although zoos try to imitate a natural environment as much as possible, some animals will display uncharacteristic behaviours that can be caused by several things. For example, the wild cat will overgroom, have a lack of appetite and can have no social interaction with each other due to there not being enough enrichment for them. The blue hyacinth macaw is a very social animal and can sometimes depend on human interaction to be emotionally happy. When unhappy, the bird may start to pull its own feathers out and become very loud and destructive. One last example is the large gibbons. They need plenty of space in their enclosure to brachiate. If the enclosure is too small for them to do so, they can develop floating limb syndrome, which is when their arms elevate in the air unintentionally. Hand rearing can have a good or bad influence depending on an animal's circumstances. Hand rearing stops them from experiencing natural environment and behaving like their species. Skills like hunting and foraging for food or being able to live within a group will not be gained as they don't know how to. Socialising with other species can be an issue for the animal as it will not know how to act. It may crave human interaction more than animal interaction. As previously mentioned, gibbons when stressed can develop floating limb syndrome, which means their arms will randomly lift into the air. Due to the enclosures not having enough open space, like in the wild, the gibbons might not brachiate to their full extent. Overgrooming can also occur when they are really stressed. Gibbons like to forage for their food but cannot necessarily do so in an enclosure. They also don't drink water like they would do in the wild. In other animal species, begging for food or pacing up and down their enclosure are uncharacteristic behaviours. Keepers should avoid hand rearing unless it's really necessary. To help with overgrooming, pacing and floating limb syndrome, the keeper should evaluate what is causing the issue and come up with a plan to eliminate the cause, whether it's caused by health issues, other animals posing a threat, or too much human intervention. Animals that beg can be fed at random times during the day to help stop anticipation. In our groups, we had to come up with an enrichment idea for the gibbons to use and benefit from. We drew up a couple of ideas and decided to make a swinging feeder so that they could eat as well as play. We wanted to use plastic jars, but after cutting and melting holes into them, they were too sharp and ended up breaking, so we tried milk jugs instead, and they worked much better. We drilled holes into a plank of wood and tied the milk jugs to it using rope. We wrapped grapes up in newspaper and put them inside the milk jugs. We tried to put the enrichment on the outside of the enclosure, but decided to put it on the inside as Malaku wouldn't let the keeper come near the fence. Every Wednesday at the zoo, we would take etholograms to record the gibbons' behaviours. We did one before the enrichment went in and one after to compare the difference. Here is the difference between the etholograms. In the graph, it shows you that all behaviours increased after the enrichment went in. Before the feeder went in, I thought that feeding and playing would increase and being on the ground and being protective would decrease. In conclusion, feeding and playing increased, which was predicted, and being on the ground and being protective actually increased as well. Here is the welfare sheet I done. The gibbons had an appropriate diet, they had access to clean water, a sleeping shelter, vegetation, a private area, suitable enrichment, appropriate space, they had access to medical care, they were able to mimic a natural environment, they were away from any predators, and they had a secure enclosure. I'd like to give a special thanks to the lecturers at Dundee College, to the staff at Camperdown Zoo and to all the keepers.